Section 3.4, we're going to be looking at more on the conditional. So we just got through looking at Silly Songs with Larry, Monkey and Tail song, right? And there's clearly something wrong with Larry's logic, right? If it doesn't have a tail, it's not a monkey, it's an ape. There's a problem with it. So what he's actually working with is conditional statements, an if-then statement, and he's working with changing them around, and he's doing something wrong. So I hope that we'll find the place where he's doing something wrong as we discuss this today. So to start with, our conditional statement, which we've seen before, is any statement written in if-then form, and we do the symbols as P implies Q with an arrow. Now there are three other implication statements that can be created from that, and they all have different names. One is the converse, one is the inverse, and one is the contrapositive. And if you look at all three of them, they're switching something in every case. The converse just changes the order around, right? Q goes to the front, Q goes to the front, and P goes to the back. The inverse keeps the order the same. The P and the Q are in the same places, but they're both negated. And the last one is the contrapositive, and it switches both. It switches the order, and it negates things. And there are some of these statements that are equivalent to one another. In particular, the original conditional statement and the contrapositive are equivalent statements. And that's what you see in this box down here at the bottom. A statement P implies Q is equivalent to the statement that reverses both, the contrapositive. Tilde Q implies tilde P. Likewise, the converse and the inverse are equivalent statements. If Q implies P, and we switch that and we negate it, thus creating the contrapositive of the converse, we get the inverse. So those two statements are equivalent. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be given a statement, and we're going to be writing the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive. Okay? Writing the converse, the inverse, and the contrapositive of the statement. Okay, I think most of you are good to go to the next one. Okay. So that's the directions. Given the statement, write the converse, the inverse, the contrapositive. And it sometimes is helpful for some of the ones that you're given to start by writing them in if-then form. This one's already in if-then form. We don't actually have the word then there, but where's the word then in there supposed to be?
Then we will.
Right. Right here's the then. Okay, so if it helps you to stick that in there, you can. The second one we're going to do in a minute is not in if-then form at all. We'll have to start there. All right. It says, if you love God, then you will obey his commands. Okay. So we're going to do the converse first, just because that's the first one requested. So what does the converse do?
Switches the Q and the P.
Right. It just switches the order. It flips it around. So we start at the end, and we move that to the beginning. And we take from the beginning, and we move it to the end. Now, the words if and then don't move. The if is still at the beginning, and the then is still in the middle. So don't go switching the words if and then around. Those stay put. It's just the pieces in between that gets shifted. So at the end of this, it says you will obey his commands. So if you, and again, as we work, we're probably going to change some verb tenses because they sound funny if we don't. So just recognize that that's an acceptable thing to do. So if you obey, you can say his commands or God's commands here. So we'll say his commands. Then what? Then you love God. Right? That's the beginning part. Then you love God. Now, I do hope that you recognize that that is not the same statement that we started with. There's lots of people who think that they have obeyed God's commands, but they're doing it out of a wrong motive, right? They're not doing it because they love God. Just like you can obey your parents out of the right motive, and you can do it out of the wrong motive, right? What can I get out of this situation? What benefit is there to me? It's the wrong motive. You're obeying, but not because you love your parents, okay? Same statement with God. This is not the same statement that we started with. Now let's do the next one. We've got the inverse. What do I do for the inverse?
If you do not love him?
Yeah, so we're going to keep the pieces where they were from the original statement, and we're going to negate them where they are. So Harry's right. If you do not love God, then what?
You will not obey his command?
Yep, then you will not obey his commands. Yes,
So no matter if you're doing converse, inverse, or contrapositive, the if and then never move.
correct. The if and the then never move. Very good idea to think of that. Now again, this is not the same statement we started with, but it is the same statement from the converse. It's phrased differently, right? If you do not love God, then you will not obey his commands. Well, not necessarily. Again, why are you doing it? Right? It doesn't necessarily have to be done because you love him. It could be done because you're trying to do something else, right? Trying on your own to be a good person. You're not doing it for the purposes of actually pleasing the Lord. All right, our last one, the contrapositive. So what does the contrapositive do?
It switches Q and B that we gave.
Okay, so it switches the order and negates them, correct? So we're going to have the if at the beginning. What's going to come next?
If you do not obey his command.
All right, if you do not obey his commands, his commands, then you do not love God. This is the same argument we tell our children in our home in regard to their parents. If you do not obey your parents, you're not showing love. Right? You're not showing that you love someone if you are not obeying them who's in an authority position over you. And the same, of course, is true for Heavenly Father. Okay? This is the same statement we started with. It's exactly the same statement. We've flipped it around and we've negated it. We've created the same statement. Okay, a little less heavy. Milk contains calcium. This does not look like an if-then statement, so that's the place we need to begin. We need to start with our original statement. How am I going to rewrite this so that it's an if-then form? I'll start with if.
It is not going to contain calcium.
You got it. If it is milk, then it contains calcium. All right, I need to make that just a tiny bit smaller. There we go. Okay, very good. First, the converse. What do I do for the converse? Flip it. So if,
If it does not contain calcium.
not yet, if it contains calcium, so no negations just yet. If it contains calcium, then what? Then it is milk. Okay, so let's just look real quick. If it's milk, does it contain calcium? Is that a true statement to start with? That is a true statement. You can look on the bottle, right? You can pick it up. It's an ingredient, if you will, or a nutrient is a better word, and a nutrient inside of milk. Is the second statement the same thing? No. What do you know of that contains calcium and is not milk? Broccoli, cheese. Put the broccoli and cheese together. Good, yeah. Orange juice. Some orange juices contain calcium. Yogurt. Almond milk. I'm still trying to convince my newest daughter that almond milk does not come from cows. It's not really milk. We just call it that because it looks like that, right? It's not really milk. Yeah, there's lots of things that would fall into this category that clearly don't make the first one the same statement. Good. How about my next one? The inverse.
If it is not milk,
Okay, if it is not milk, then what?
it doesn't contain calcium.
Then it does not contain calcium. And everything you guys just came up with a moment ago works here again. The broccoli, the cheese, my almond milk, the orange juice, the yogurt, they all fit into the same category because these two statements are equivalent. And then our last one, the contrapositive. Okay, Luke, this is the one you were trying to do for me a minute ago. You going to give it a shot?
Oh, you want me to?
Sure. You were on track to starting this one.
So if it does not contain calcium, then it is not milk.
Excellent. If it does not contain calcium,
For the converse, I had a little line out there that I mistaken for a negative. That's why I said that.
no problem. So if it does not contain calcium, then it is not milk. Right? So you get the nutrition label, you look at the nutrients, you see no calcium, you can tell for sure there's no milk in that thing. Right? Not only does it not equal milk, it doesn't contain it at all. Okay. The last one is simply rewriting symbols to do the same thing. Okay, so we can do it with symbols just like we do with words, a lot quicker. So if I'm taking an implication that says tilde P implies Q, and I want to do the converse, what am I supposed to do for converse? Flip it. So don't change any negations. If they're there, they stay. If they're gone, they don't come into play. Q moves to the front, tilde P moves to the back. Right? We just flip them. What does my inverse do?
Keeps in the same spot, but change the location.
Right. Keeps them where they are, but if it's a negation, I'm going to remove it, and if it doesn't have a negation, I'm going to put it in. Okay? So at the beginning, there it said tilde P, now it will say P, and at the end it said Q, and now it will say tilde Q. Fabulous. And the last one, contrapositive. What will I do for this one?
Not
Okay, negative Q, tilde Q, implies P. So we flipped the order and we changed the negations. Okay, so we've already mentioned some of the things that are in this next table we're going to create. The next table talks about the fact that not all if-then statements actually look like if-then. So we're going to look at some of the different kinds of translations that you could see for if-thens, and we've encountered some of them. So obviously you can do if P then Q, and we've seen the second one, if P, comma, Q, where we kept inserting the word then in. Those happen a lot. Now you hear me say out loud, P implies Q, right? We do that one. The one at the end is quite different. It says P only if Q. Right, it's got the word only in there showing up. The next two we don't see used very much. Of course, sort of an old English kind of thing. P is sufficient for Q, or Q is necessary for P. Those are correct. We're not going to see them much, but just so that you're aware of them. And we've seen the all P or Q. I gave you the example, all squares are rectangles, right? That's an if-then one we can change. And then we actually saw the last one show up as well, where the if part shows up at the end, and we actually have to shift it to the beginning for the order to match, right? So Q if P, if we flip it around where we put the P at the beginning, or put the if at the beginning, the P sort of drags along with it and it switches it. So we're going to do 3 examples of statements that do not have our standard if-then form, and we're going to write them in if-then form. Okay, the first one is already similar to one we've done. All whole numbers are integers. You got it. If it is a whole number, then it is an integer. Okay, that one looks just like my rectangle one that I did, square rectangle one. All right, how about the principal will hire more teachers only if the school board approves.
If the school board approves, then the principal will hire.
And if the word only weren't there, that would be what we would want. But the word only makes a difference. That's why I put it in here, is because it's so tempting. Do you see my list over here? If you have the only, oh, that meant to be a highlighter. If you have only if in the middle, like that, like we do, you actually have the same statement without shifting anything except for moving the if to the beginning. It's a weird one. Make yourself like a note. Only if doesn't change the order, whereas if you had just the if, like over here, it would. Only if is treated differently. So over here, while it's really tempting to do exactly what Madison did and switch the order, we actually don't. And the culprit, the reason why, is the word only. So our statement will stay in the same order, but we'll put the word if at the beginning. Okay, so we're going to say if the principal, and again, will hire sounds funny now, so I'm just going to say hires, all right? Change my verb tense a little bit. If the principal hires more teachers, then the school board approves. And that really is a different statement than saying that if the school board approves, he does hire, or he or she does hire. It's not the same thing. Because just because they approve doesn't mean he's hiring. But if he's hiring, it must be true that they approved it to be done. Do you see the difference? It's a weird one. That only if is a strange little creature. All right, the last one's the most awkward looking to begin with. The square of a two-digit number whose units digit is 5 will end in 25. What are we going to do? Any guesses?
Is the second part, first part?
Nope, the order won't change. The order won't change. It's a good question. So our order's going to stay the same. Do you remember when we did our milk calcium one? We said something like, if it is milk, right? We're going to do something like that here too. If it is. And it sounds kind of weird. Like we could have said if the food is or something like that might have made it a little bit more clear. We used the word if. If you want it, we can use the word it here as well if you wish. But I'm going to use the phrase a number because that's what the it is. So if a number is, and then I'm going to write the statement that's here, the square of a two-digit number. If the number is a square of a two-digit number whose unit digit is 5, then what? Then it will end in 25. All this is saying is if I have a two-digit number like 15 because it ends in 5, or 25, or 75, if I have any of these numbers and I square them, the answer will have 25 at the end of the answer. That's all the statement's actually saying. It's so strange sounding. It's not really a complicated fact, but that's what it's trying to say. And this is how we could rewrite it. with some variations potentially to put it in if-then form.